Hello, everybody. I'm James Conlon. Welcome back to Coffee with Conlon. I have a lot of questions to answer, but before we do, I want to say to all of you that are on the West Coast, I hope that you are safe from the fires, the smoke, the bad air, all of those added. I hope that you and your families are safe. And that's just in addition to all the concerns about the COVID virus. So we hope all these things will pass, and they will, of course. In the meantime, keep our minds occupied. I keep my mind occupied with your questions and questions of others. Here's my coffee cup. I hope you've got one by your side. And here we go. First question is from Lisa Rowley. How do you, as a conductor, reconcile your interpretation of a piece with a star singer when they have a different interpretation? That's normal. It's like asking, well, how do you feel if you're a baseball player and the ball comes at you? So human beings are all different. All singers are different. All conductors, orchestras, soloists, instrumentalists. Everybody has a different feeling for music. At the same time, your job as a conductor is to unify it. So that this question actually applies to any collaborative soloist, not just singers. It's also pianists, violinists, violists, oboe players, anything. What do you do when you have different, really radically different ideas? Now, my first purpose, well, I take the attitude that the composer comes first, not me, not the soloist. If I think that the soloist has a different view of a piece and it's within the scope of what is stylistic for that composer, then I'm fine with it. I try to make it possible for them to play or sing in a way that corresponds with their feelings. I try to make that possible. If I really disagree, I say so, and then you have to discuss it. Leonard Bernstein was once asked that question, if there's an argument between the conductor and a soloist, who wins the argument? And there are two versions of the answer. The first one is the one who's more famous, and the other one is the one who earns more money. Both facetious answers, but there's a certain amount of truth in both of them. Now, here's another question. Given that we've been under a quarantine for 6 months, when we're able to see opera live and in person again, what are you most looking forward to? I'm most looking forward to doing exactly what I do most of the time. I want to be back in the theater. I want to be back on concert stages. I want to be able to lead our orchestra, our chorus, and our assembled soloists through the productions that you see at LA Opera. And I could say by extension that goes exactly the same for any of my concert activity in the United States or Europe. So these following questions now were asked by students of the Butler Opera Center at University of Texas, Austin, and I'm very appreciative for them sending these questions in. First one, in your career, you have collaborated with many great artists. I am sure you have wonderful memories of these performances. Might you share some of those cherished memories? Yes, but difficult to know where to start. I've been conducting for almost half a century since I started as a teenager, and the memories are too many, and so many that I could barely touch even a fraction. But I think there's one element I'd like to single out, and that is I was fortunate enough to start conducting young, so that I still had contact with some singers of the golden age, so to speak, and some very great artists. And it's not to name drop, but just to give you an idea that I learned so much from them because aside from their individual artistry, the orientation of these artists was so serious about art and opera and so knowledgeable that it's shown me a standard by which to judge my own performances, but judge also the performances of others against that. Several names jump out at me. One is Boris Christoph, the great Bulgarian bass. We collaborated several times, and I remained close to him, family-like, with him and with his wife until their deaths. And another one is Tito Gobbi, who, by the way, happened to have been the brother-in-law of Boris Christoph. And similarly, I stayed close to them in such a way that I could continue to learn from them. I used to visit them in Rome to learn from them. I picked their brains. I asked them 1,000 questions about how things were. What was that like? Where did you learn that? What do you think of today's performances? And I learned so much from both of them. Christoph, of course, sang with me. Tito Gobbi, by the time I worked with him, was directing, a stage director. Other names that come to mind: Muriel Freni, Renato Scotto, these are Cornel MacNeil, John Vickers. These are just some names out of many. There's one story I want to tell you, though, about James McCracken. James McCracken, of course, one of the great dramatic tenors of his time, probably sang Otello. I asked him, he couldn't even count anymore, over 300 times. So you could pretty much say he knew it. My first Otello experience with Otello was in Washington in 1976, and James McCracken was singing, and I thought to myself, well, this is going to be very, very, very difficult, because he's sung it so much and he knows so much, and let's see if he'll even rehearse. Well, he rehearsed more than anybody. He wanted to know everything. He wanted to go over every passage over and over and over again until he felt he had gotten it right, until he felt that we were in accord. And one day I made a suggestion to him, and I said, well, I think that this would be better if this tempo went a little slower here, and here's the reason why. And I gave him the reason. And he said, that's a great reason. Then he said, I worked with a great chorus conductor, and he made the following suggestion of something you can do at the end of the first act chorus. Why don't you try that? And so I did, and I loved it. I would say about 7 or 8 years after that, we had another go at Otello. And when we got to that part of the chorus, I said, oh, by the way, I'm going to have the chorus sing this in the following way. And then I described it, and he said, oh, that's great. He said, who told you about that? I said, you did. Then we went on to the second act, where the passage that I had given him another correction was, or another idea, and I seemed to be going a little bit faster. And he said, why don't you go slowly there? And I said, well, let's see, why would we do that? And then he gave me the reason. I said, that was really great. Where did you get that idea? And he said, you told me. Well, this is just a little story. It's an anecdote, but it shows you the kind of seriousness of the really, really great artists. Here's another question. I wonder what qualities you look for in a young artist, someone that you'd be excited to mentor, support, and introduce to the wide range of audiences. Well, I take for granted, be it singer, pianist, violinist, that they have basically mastered their instrument, that they can sing or play whatever would be required of them, and that they have some extra dimensions that are important. They have to have a communicative abilities. They have to be able to, they have to be very good musicians. Now, that is sometimes an issue with singers, because singers don't have necessarily the same musical education as instrumentalists do, but of course, it's preferable that they do. With singers also, I prefer that they have some command of the foreign languages that they're going to be required to sing, particularly Italian, French, German, and also be able to sing Anglo-Saxon operas in a meaningful manner. So their diction matters to me, their ability to work, and most of all, an attitude toward work. I prefer seriousness, which is to say that they are willing and able to apply themselves to the task. Many performers in our field, singers, instrumentalists, conductors, find themselves at a point where they have to decide whether they should go to Europe for work or stay in the United States. I think an opinion from someone like you, who has had both experiences, would be most valuable. Well, this is, of course, directed mostly at American singers. My answer is that I value my experience, and it's half of my life really, in Europe, because it is still the source of most of the music that we're performing. I think it becomes pretty clear, those who have been through that experience and those who haven't, not about the basic quality of their voices or the basic ability to conduct an orchestra, but in the depth of culture that informs their performances. I think that immersing yourself in those various cultures is invaluable, and you can never have enough of it. I went to Europe the first time when I was 20. I got all cultured up. I thought that was great. I said I better go back one more summer so I can get the rest of it. Well, of course, that's been going on all my life, and it never ends. So I highly recommend going to Europe if you can. And I also say, if you can do both, or if you already have a career in America, I would say try to do both, because you will learn every time you step on a stage in another country. You are learning more than just an opera. You are learning culture, as it were. In your capacity as music director, you've worked in Germany, France, Italy, and the United States, and also the Netherlands. How would you describe the differences, how opera houses work in these quite different countries? Well, just to begin, in the Netherlands, I was a conductor of the Rotterdam Philharmonic. It was a symphony orchestra, and so I have no experience conducting opera in the Netherlands, but I do have a lot of experience, having been 13 years in Cologne, Germany, having been 9 years in Paris as a music director in both of those places, in Italy as a music director at the Rai Orchestra. Again, that's an orchestra, not an opera company, but I have been conducting operas in Italy since 1985. So you get a pretty good, clear picture of cultural norms. I would say that Germany is perhaps the most contrasting system from that of the United States, in that they're so-called repertory opera companies. That means the alternation of works goes very rapidly, and sometimes there are 4 or 5 different works in a week. And that's because there is a depth of appreciation of the opera in Europe, and those houses are full, and people come often. The idea of a repertory opera house, and sometimes they have a resident troupe who learn many roles and are able to jump in on short notice. They may alternate those roles. If you work in Vienna, for instance, it's an amazing turnover. I mean, sometimes every night of the week is a different opera. They might have 2 or 3 going at once. In Paris, we had 2 opera houses open, the traditional Palais Garnier, the old Opéra, and of course the newer theater, the Bastille. So those are theaters where opera is being performed constantly. We gave over 300 performances a year in Paris. Now in Italy, there's something a little bit different. It's called the stagione system. Stagione means season, as in the 4 seasons in Italian. And what that generally means is that you produce an opera, you run it for however many performances, and then you close it and you open another. Now, at a certain point, some of those will overlap with each other, but you concentrate all on one product. I like that in one sense, because I feel that the whole opera company is very concentrated on 1 or 2 things at a time. The repertory theater has its charm in the sense that the German orchestras know their operas incredibly well, and they have a depth of of the past. They played some of these orchestras have played these operas many times. The Metropolitan Opera Orchestra has a tremendous depth of repertoire that they know and can activate immediately. Now in Los Angeles, we have a system which is definitely the stagione system. We produce an opera, we give it its run, we go on to the next one, and that's how it works. I like that. Also, as I said, because of the concentration necessary. These are just some of the differences. The other differences have much to do with the personalities of a culture. Personality of Italian musicians, and Italians in general are very different from German musicians and German people, and they are all very different from the French. Each one has their own character, and that character is part of what interested me, along with everything else in the long life that I have had conducting in Europe. And I'm able to bring a lot of that back to us here in the United States. So that's a very short answer to a very long question. How, if at all, has your preparation process changed for The Anonymous Lover compared to other more typical circumstances? First of all, I should explain that The Anonymous Lover is an opera by Joseph Bologne Chevalier de Saint-Georges, who was a Black composer contemporary of Mozart's, who produced concerts and operas in Paris during the time before the French Revolution and also afterwards. He's an amazing composer and largely neglected unjustifiably, and one assumes that is for the reason that that because he had a mother from Guadeloupe and a French father, there was a lot of prejudice against him, and also following his life, it was very, very easily forgotten. All of that unjust because he was a brilliant individual. First of all, he was apparently the leading fencer master of France. And if that weren't enough, he was an excellent composer and a violinist. We assume that he met Mozart when Mozart first came to Paris. We know that he traveled to the Esterhazy Palace to meet Haydn, to commission symphonies, which were to become the so-called Paris symphonies, and to conduct their premieres. The Anonymous Lover is a very, I would say, typical opera of its time, with a very complicated love story. It's a comedy, but it's a comedy with some very, very deeply expressive music. It's absolutely wonderful. I'm very excited about doing it. What are some of the challenges? One challenge is that the manuscript scores, in many cases, lack tempo markings. So you have to figure out what they ought to be. There's no tradition. You can't depend on anything you've ever heard or seen, and that's a challenge. And I would say constructing the opera, not just conducting it, but constructing the dramatic experience, which is part of what we do as when we conduct operas, is also sometimes a measure of you've been able to maybe do an opera many times or several times, or having seen it, you know what works and you know what doesn't work. You don't have any of that behind you. You have to figure it all out. And that, by the way, is fun. You have to do the same thing if you're conducting a world premiere. And that's one of the challenges. Now, the other challenge is that this is going to be a streamed opera. We are not allowed to have an audience yet for obvious reasons. And so we are going to capture this streamed. And in this particular case, because we can't put everybody together, we're going to put the orchestra in one room, and the singers will see me on a monitor, and they will all be properly distanced. So that these are challenges for this particular time and this particular production. So I like challenges, and I like having to be imaginative about solving those issues. Here's a question from Valentina. Maestro, I met you in Madrid when you were conducting the 499th performance of a Verdi opera. By the way, I subsequently made it to 500 in Salzburg. I wrote you a letter and you wrote me back. My question now is, when will you be back in Madrid, and what are your plans? Well, my next appearance in Madrid is a very special one. It is not an operatic one. It's a symphony concert, or I should say it's a symphonic day. If all goes well, I will conduct seventh symphonies, number 7, in one day with 4 orchestras. So we are calling it 7 sevens. And those 7s are Haydn, Mozart, and Bruckner, Beethoven and Dvorak, Mahler, and Shostakovich. And it will start at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it will finish at 10 or 11 at night. I do get breaks in between, and of course we also have to change orchestras, and that will all take place in the Auditorio in Madrid, and I'm looking forward to that experience. That's a first for me. I've never done anything like that, and I'm very excited about that. This is a question from Wendell Whiting. We love classical operas, but wonder if you would like to see more operas created that can win the appreciation of current opera audiences enough to be presented more often along with classical operas. Do you think such a change would draw more young people to opera? And a second question, what are the chances of stimulating more highly successful contemporary operas? This is Wendell Whiting writing from Naples, Florida. Well, this is a very standard question, but a very good question. Does contemporary music attract contemporary audiences? There is a common assumption that is true, and it is tested in some places, but untested in others. And I don't think I have a definitive answer to that. I don't think it's an automatic thing. I think the opera has to be good. That is primary. We need more composition. We need more symphonic composition, instrumental composition, operas. We need them all the time to replenish what we call the repertory. And in that regard, we're having some wonderful streamed operas, calling them shorts, virtual shorts. They're coming up shortly. This is a way to deal with both contemporary issues and to deal with the COVID crisis as long as it lasts. So, taken all together, I don't know that one can draw an absolute line that contemporary opera will draw more people in. But I do think high production values, which are committed performances theatrically, scenically, as well as musically, do the best to draw people in. And I think one of the most important elements, which we should not forget, is that education is fundamental. We all talk about how to get more people to come to the concert theaters, the concert halls, the opera theaters. But the fact is, children need to be exposed to classical music when they're very young so that they absorb it by osmosis and take it in before all the other social questions come in, like, is that snobby to like that music? Is that you're out, you're not cool if you do that? That happens later. But what would happen spontaneously if everybody, if all parents would start playing classical music for their children without saying this is classical music and you're supposed to learn it and you're supposed to appreciate it, if they would just simply play it and have it heard around the household very young, they are more likely to get more interested as time goes on. Of course, if you want to see that your children have music lessons, that's also, of course, a great boon. But I think a lot of it has to do with the education, and I think that schools, which were much different when I was growing up, in that was much more available in the public school than today, I think that we would not be confronted with some of the challenges that we are in the current atmosphere. And the last question is, what are the chances of stimulating more highly successful contemporary operas? I think they're good. We have some great composers in the world today. We have some very good composers coming up and producing opera for us. And I think that is the way of the future. So I think I've answered everything here on the list for today. And I hope that those answers were to your liking. You are always welcome to send in your questions, and we love to hear from you. We love to have those questions. In the meantime, I want you to stay safe from the fires, and I want you to stay safe from the COVID viruses. Wear your mask and respect social distancing, and that will help us slow down the course of this virus, and that will enable us at Los Angeles Opera to be back in the theater with all of you packed in like sardines the way we were before the virus. Stay well and see you the next time around.